I remember being in grade 5 and hearing these words for the very first time. Let's talk about sex. Now, in a class full of 10-year-olds, all of us were giggling because we were talking about something inappropriate. Students were blushing at the sight of awkward diagrams, and our mouths were gawked open as we watched monotone instructional videos from the 80s. You see, that was my first introduction to sex ed. My teacher went over anatomy, the basics of sex, but that was pretty much it. And looking back now, all she gave me were textbook definitions. Now, those textbook definitions are important, do not get me wrong. But students deserve to know more than just what an ovary is. We deserve open and honest conversations about practical knowledge and answers to questions that were never even addressed. So after that lesson, I started noticing a lot of issues regarding sexual health come up in my own life, my friends' lives, in the media, and I wondered why. Why is the norm that 1 in 4 women experience sexual violence? Why at the age of 14 was I that 1 in 4? Why did no one tell me how I should be treated in a relationship? And how come no one informed the girls in my class and myself that taking birth control would make us hungry all the time? Now, I became so frustrated by the lack of education around these topics, and I wanted change. So I decided to do something about it. I dedicated an immense amount of time researching, interviewing peers, and even published an article on the topic in my school newspaper. From all of this, I came to the conclusion that yes, these conversations are crucial to happen in high schools, but they should actually be happening in classes like my grade 5 class. Because by the time students turn 18, 56% of girls will have been sexually harassed, and so will 40% of boys. Now this needs to change, but it can only be done with educational reform. I believe there are 6 key topics sex ed curriculums can include in the classroom to make this change. First, we need to talk about consent and rejection, and we need to start way earlier. Currently, consent is taught as a one-time yes or no question right off the bat. I remember being given a script to practice this question that went a little something like this. Hey, is it okay if I touch you there? No. That's okay. Thank you so much for articulating your boundaries. Who talks like that? And what 16-year-old is walking out of class thinking, you know what, consent is really hot? Viewing consent as a one-time thing has catastrophic impacts. And educators are pleading that we view consent as a spectrum because of many factors like gender roles, double standards, and peer pressure that all influence one's choice. Yes, a no means no, but so does anything else that is not a firm yes. It's important that we view consent as a spectrum because consent can change and it's not fixed. The timeline of your relationship does not make it fixed either. It doesn't matter if they are your new boo or wifey for lifey. There is no default setting. Consent is also linked to rejection. Now, women actually pretend to be in relationships in fear that if they say no to a man, they will get sexually assaulted. This potentially fatal response women sadly expect has a direct correlation to the misunderstanding of consent and shame that accompanies rejection. We need to break down this shame by first addressing why we feel so horrible when we're rejected and dispel any belief that it has anything to do with being a failure. The end goal of these conversations is to create a sense of normalcy around giving and receiving no's. I want to see a children's storybook where Daisy the dragon asks Petunia the platypus for consent to play with her toys and then is okay when Petunia respectfully rejects her. This sounds trivial and silly right now, but the current message we are sending kids is far worse. It is far too common to force children to hug their relatives or to wear certain clothes, and this tells them that there is a lack of autonomy over their own bodies. If we can empower children to give consent and to give and receive rejection, we can empower them as teenagers, university students, full-grown adults, and then grandparents who can pass this message down to their little ones. If we are brave enough to start this dialogue with children, we can disrupt the foundation sexual violence is built upon. Now, when I was going around surveying my peers, I asked them, okay, what do you want to learn about in sex ed class? And the majority of their responses fell under the category of emotional decisions, like knowing if the time is right. So this brings me to the second key topic we need to start including in every sex ed class, the emotional aspect of sex. You see, teachers are rigorously testing us when it comes to anatomy and things like that, but they leave us hanging when it comes to depicting what a healthy relationship should look like. Too often, these lessons are only used as scare tactics to avoid things like STIs, date rape, unwanted pregnancies, and so many other scary things. It's like students have been given the keys to drive a car by knowing the basic how-tos of sex, But the manual on what fuel to put in or what even creates a healthy relationship has been completely tossed out the window. They also fail to address that sex is not just a mechanism to creating a child. Sex is about pleasure and intimacy. Because whether educators want to admit it or not, students are having sex without the purpose of reproducing. So it's really important that we address all perspectives of sex. Now, I was lucky enough to be in a class where the emotional aspect of sex was brought up. Let me tell you, my teacher was the hero of the hallways after that lecture. He outlined the importance of trust in relationships, signs of an abusive partner, and even what to say if someone refuses to wear a condom. It was amazing. He was also able to acknowledge that the majority of us are having sex or will start to soon. So it's important to give us the tools to create these healthy relationships. Because at the end of the day, our bodies are made to enjoy sex. So let's stop teaching it as if it's something to be afraid of or ashamed of, when really it's quite natural. We also need to have a certain level of bodily autonomy that we discuss in these classrooms. Because if you can say no to things, you should feel confident enough to enthusiastically say yes, or even ask for something as long as you respect the answer. By ignoring all aspects of sex, we are creating situations that students will have physically, emotionally, and mentally unsafe sex. A safe relationship is the foundation of safe sex, but if we only focus on the end result of avoiding unwanted pregnancies and not focusing on what an emotionally safe relationship looks like, nothing will be done to address the root cause. And that is when we will see 16-year-olds getting knocked up. But thankfully, proper education around birth control can help with that, so long as our education system gives teens the entire picture. This is my third point that we need to expand on in the classroom: the diversity of birth control options. Now, it always baffled me how lessons would only focus on condoms and hormone pills when options like IUDs, pills, shots, and even patches existed as well. Hormone pills specifically could be an entirely different topic because of the many side effects that trick so many women because we don't have enough education around them. Our sex ed needs to outline the pros and cons for every single birth control choice that we have in order to fully educate those who will be taking them. These conversations are so vital in the classroom because we don't see them on TV. I mean, have any of you seen your favorite heartthrobs have a conversation about contraception? Okay, cool, because me neither. Without the support of mainstream media, teachers have the sole responsibility of educating students on birth control. And it is also their privilege to redirect the onus of contraception to both partners equally, since the majority of dialogue when talking about heterosexual couples is directed towards females. Now, the message should be that birth control and contraception are a 50-50 responsibility. So if we have educators helping to spread this message, we can empower both young women and men to feel confident knowing that they have the right tools to make the best decisions for themselves. So that's it. We've done it. The kids use birth control, they're having safe sex, everything's good, right? No. What about after teens have sex? This is my fourth point, the double standards that we refuse to acknowledge. Now, every single time I would walk down my school halls, I would hear things like, "Oh, he scored last night," or "Oh my goodness, she lost her virginity." We all know this double standard exists, yet we continue to perpetuate it. Why do we talk about sex as if men can gain something, women lose something? Now, the negative effects of this have always been clearly evident, as our imbalanced language leads to a sense of entitlement in young men and a subconscious need to dominate. Just ask the 58,800 women who are sexually assaulted by men every single year in BC. Now, these numbers are not there to scare us. They are there to empower us to start the conversation and to start them young. Because when I was in grade 5, the boys and girls were split up in the class. We had 2 separate lessons, so we got 2 separate messages. But this cannot happen anymore. You see, if children receive the same message, they can hold each other accountable for their actions. It will allow them to see each other as equals, and even use these classes as a practice ground for communication before the stakes become too high. The lessons we teach today will become the morals our next generation will preach. And by cutting off the language that fuels this inbred double standard, there's nothing for these statistics or behaviors to stand on. The end goal of incorporating this topic into sex ed is to create a future where women don't have to have their keys out when they're walking at night, and men don't feel pressure to fit into the toxic mold of masculinity. This leads directly into the 5th topic that all classrooms need to incorporate: sexual violence and assault. we need to develop an understanding of where these things come from. Yes, talking about consent and rejection is a great place to start, but we need to expand to erase any negative stigma around speaking up. Mental health is a perfect example of how these tough conversations have created positive change. While there is still so far to go with the topic of mental health, we've normalized speaking up by starting these dialogues at a much younger age. And it's greatly changed our social footprint. So why can't we do the same thing for sexual harassment and assault? Our education system also needs to pick up this responsibility, since 71% of students on campuses in Canadian post-secondary schools report having witnessed or seen or experienced unwanted sexual behavior in the school setting. 71%. That is way too high. Now, we can automatically change school culture by addressing these issues on campuses. Sex educators have scientifically proven that sexual violence stems from a lack of education. So it seems pretty simple that we could fix this by addressing these issues and creating opportunities for this education on those campuses. Elementary schools are actually the perfect place to start, because by the time students get to high school, educators are battling a solid decade of false narratives. So the end goal of having these dialogues is to give men the freedom and tools to not just be a neutral bystander, but feel brave enough to have the conversation. Because right now, our media is teaching young boys that real men assert dominance, not compassion. No wonder gender violence is on the rise. A way we can collapse this model is to address the why. Why do men do these things? A lot of the times, it's not because they are just inherently bad. It's a learned behavior fueled by the need to be accepted. Sexual harassment and assault aren't and never have been women's issues, but we combat them like they are. So by giving young men the tools and freedom to be an ally to women, and if we give survivors the space to speak up, we can make this change and change school culture. And my last and final point is the importance of allyship. Every single school needs to include the LGBTQ perspective in all sex ed lessons, not just the ones the day after are specifically dedicated to them. Our language is a huge issue as well when it comes to this topic. You see, as children, we adopt our views from our primary caregivers, but students spend 1/3 of their lives at school, so our teachers become extremely influential in our development. This is why it is crucial that educators take the time to give the same safe sex tips for homosexual couples as they would for heterosexual couples. By doing so, we will dispel the belief that those within this community are not mainstream. Using neutral pronouns when describing situations is also imperative because it shifts our inherent biases. If we continue to teach the same way and fail to have a general education around sexuality, like explaining the difference between gender, sex, sexual preference, sexual orientation, etc., we will continue to see the rise of violence against those within this community. In fact, LGBTQ plus members are 4 times as likely to experience violence than someone not identifying as LGBTQ plus. By making this shift, not only will we be recorrecting these biases and diminishing this stat, putting an end to it, but the impact on an individual level will be enormous. Every single student deserves to feel represented in their classroom, and I am challenging our education system to do just that. So now, educators, I am talking directly to you. I know that this may be very scary to introduce these topics to a group of 10-year-olds or even 16-year-olds. It would be easier to turn on that grainy sex ed video from the 80s. We are equally as uncomfortable as you if it makes you feel better. But this is where we need you. You see, students are going to model your thoughts and behaviors, and with this great power comes a great responsibility. Because whether you know it or not, we are listening. Students are going to look to you for the guidance and answers that our parents are too embarrassed to give us. I know this sounds terrifying, but it's actually simpler than you would imagine. Like I said before, I had the privilege of being in the class where all these issues were brought up. Of course, my teacher was nervous to tell a bunch of grade 12 boys that birth control is equally their responsibility. But he did a fantastic job. And not only did he change the mindset of every single student sitting in those seats, but every student we talked to, and they talked to, and so on. You see, messages like this spread like wildfire, and a little bit of positive fire is exactly what we need right now. So believe me when I say that the benefits to having these tough conversations greatly outweigh the bad, even if a few students do turn red. But I know some of you are probably sitting there thinking that nothing will happen. None of this will make change. To those of you, I respectfully say no. You see, I am too tired of shoulder checking every 20 seconds when I'm out walking alone at night. And I am too tired of frantically researching birth control options for me and my friends because I'm scared we're going to get pregnant. I am just exhausted, so I have to make a difference. If you don't believe me when I say that comprehensive sexual education will fix this, believe the stats. It is scientifically proven that sex ed reduces the risk of STIs, increases the use of contraception, and lowers the number of unwanted pregnancies. You see, these have always been the goals of sex ed, but by addressing the emotional aspect, teaching kids how to give and receive rejection and consent, acknowledging the double standard, expanding our lessons on birth control, acknowledging the importance of becoming an ally, and even covering the difficult topic of sexual violence, we will create learners who are best prepared for the realities of sex. Now, there are things you, the audience, can do even seconds after this talk ends to help contribute to this positive change. Students, bring these issues up with peers, teachers, admin, and parents. Educators, remodel how you teach sex ed. Bring these issues up in staff meetings, or even plan events to start this conversation. Parents, take these topics home and start a dialogue with your kids. You see, the horrifying stats and headlines we see every single day will not change unless we disrupt and diminish the foundation which fuel these actions. I believe this all stems from a lack of education. My goal here today was to start a conversation about sex ed. So let's start talking about sex. Thank you.